Ever wonder what happens when enemies get their hands on each other's top-secret technology? Well, during the intense air battles of World War II, that's exactly what happened. The Americans managed to capture a Japanese G4M bomber, famously codenamed Betty by the Allies. This was a huge deal. It was like getting a look under the hood of your rival's race car. American pilots and engineers were eager to dissect it, to understand its strengths, and more importantly, its weaknesses. The Betty was a formidable aircraft on paper. It was sleek, fast, and could fly incredibly long distances, farther than almost any other bomber of its time. This range was its superpower, allowing it to strike targets deep behind enemy lines, places the Allies thought were safe. So, when the American technical teams finally got their hands on a captured Betty, they expected to find a marvel of engineering. They tore it down, piece by piece, analyzing every rivet, every wire, every system. They marveled at its lightweight construction and its powerful engines. But then they got to the fuel system, and everything came to a screeching halt. The engineers and test pilots stared in disbelief. They looked, and then they looked again, thinking they must have missed something. Where were the self-sealing fuel tanks? Where was the armor plating around the fuel lines? There was nothing. The Betty's massive fuel tanks, the very source of its legendary range, were completely unprotected. They were essentially just thin aluminum containers filled with thousands of pounds of highly flammable aviation fuel, sitting inside a lightweight airframe. To the American pilots, who were used to flying planes like the B-17 Flying Fortress with its robust self-sealing tanks and armor, this was completely baffling. It wasn't just a design flaw. It seemed like a deliberate, almost suicidal design choice. Self-sealing fuel tanks were a game-changing technology that the Americans had invested in heavily. The concept was simple but brilliant. The tank was lined with layers of rubber and treated fabric. If a bullet or a piece of shrapnel pierced the tank, the fuel would leak out and hit the inner rubber layer, causing it to swell up and instantly plug the hole. This prevented catastrophic fuel leaks and fires, dramatically increasing an aircraft's chances of surviving combat damage and making it back home. American planes were built with survivability as a top priority. They were designed to take a beating and keep on flying. So, for the American pilots examining the Betty, the absence of this basic protection was just incomprehensible. Why would anyone build a frontline bomber without it? It went against everything they knew about aircraft design and combat survival. The immediate conclusion was that the Japanese were simply behind in technology. Perhaps they just hadn't figured out how to make effective self-sealing tanks yet. But as the analysis continued, a different, more complex picture began to emerge. The Japanese engineers weren't ignorant. They were making a calculated trade-off. They knew about self-sealing tanks. The problem was that this technology was heavy. All those layers of rubber and armor added significant weight to an aircraft. And in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, one thing mattered more than anything else: range. Every extra pound of protection meant less fuel could be carried, which in turn meant a shorter operational radius. The Japanese High Command had made a strategic decision. They prioritized range above all else. They wanted a bomber that could fly farther and faster than anything the Allies had. To achieve this, they stripped away anything they deemed non-essential. And in their doctrine, heavy defensive measures like self-sealing tanks and armor plating were considered a luxury they couldn't afford. This fundamental difference in design philosophy revealed a stark contrast in military doctrine. The American approach was built around attrition and survivability. They had a massive industrial base that could produce planes in huge numbers, but more importantly, they valued the lives and experience of their trained aircrews. A plane that could bring its crew home, even if it was shot up, was a successful design. The crew could fly again tomorrow. The Japanese, on the other hand, operated with a different mindset. Their doctrine was often focused on achieving a single decisive blow. The aircraft and its crew were instruments to achieve a mission objective, and their survival was secondary. This offense first. Its mentality meant they were willing to sacrifice defensive capabilities for superior offensive performance. In this case, speed and extreme range. The Betty's design was a direct reflection of this. By omitting the heavy protective systems, Japanese engineers were able to create an aircraft that could fly over 2,400 miles. This allowed them to project power across the vast distances of the Pacific theater in a way that surprised the Allies early in the war. The Betty was instrumental in sinking the British battleships HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse, a shocking demonstration of the new reality of air power over naval power. But this advantage came at a terrible cost. Allied pilots quickly discovered the Betty's fatal flaw. A few well-placed shots from their 50 caliber machine guns into the wing roots were often enough to turn the bomber into a massive fireball. American pilots grimly nicknamed it the one-shot lighter or the flying Zippo because of how icily it would ignite when hit. The very feature that gave it its incredible range, its massive fuel load, also made it incredibly vulnerable. For the American test pilots who flew the captured Betty, the experience was eye-opening and, frankly, a bit terrifying. They praised its handling and speed. It was agile for a bomber of its size. But they could never shake the feeling of vulnerability. They were acutely aware that they were flying in a tinderbox, that the slightest damage could lead to a catastrophic explosion. They flew it with extreme caution, practicing maneuvers but always conscious of the unprotected fuel tanks just a few feet away. Their flight reports were a mix of professional admiration for the aircraft's performance and sheer astonishment at its lack of survivability. It confirmed what they were seeing in combat. The Betty was a potent weapon, but a fragile one. The trade-off the Japanese had made was clear. They had sacrificed the safety of their crews for the reach of their bombers. As the war progressed, the consequences of this design choice became tragically apparent for the Japanese. As the Allies introduced better fighters with more powerful armament and improved tactics, the loss rates for Betty crews became astronomical. The flying lighters were shot down in droves. Experienced crews were lost at an unsustainable rate, and Japan's industrial capacity couldn't replace the planes or train new crews fast enough. The initial advantage of extreme range was completely negated by the aircraft's extreme vulnerability. Late in the war, the Japanese did try to introduce versions of the Betty with self-sealing tanks and armor, but it was too little, too late. The damage had been done. Ultimately, the story of the Betty bomber and its unprotected fuel tanks is a fascinating case study in military, engineering, and strategic priorities. It wasn't about one side being smarter than the other. It was about two different nations with different resources, different strategic goals, and fundamentally different philosophies on how to wage war. The Americans, with their industrial might, chose to build flying fortresses that could absorb punishment and bring their crews home. The Japanese, seeking a decisive edge in a vast theater of war, chose to build a glass cannon aircraft with incredible offensive reach but a fatal, glaring weakness. The mystery of the Betty's design wasn't a mystery of technology, but a mystery of priorities. A stark reminder that in war, every design choice is a gamble, and the price of that gamble is often paid by the brave crews who fly the machines. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this piece of aviation history interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Let me know in the comments what you think about this design trade-off. See you in the next one.